Victims of domestic violence may think twice about getting help from social workers if proposed amendments to the Domestic Violence Act are passed. For instance, Section 2A states that a medical practitioner, health service provider, social worker, official in the employ of a public health establishment, educator or a caregiver will be obligated to report cases. This is even if disclosed to them in confidence. Section 2B extends the obligation to anyone who has knowledge or a reasonable belief or suspicion that domestic violence has been committed. Activists who participated in the discussion said, of course, they are concerned about this particular thing. And to speak to us tonight about, this particular matter and, some of the reservations that the activists have voiced out here is Lisa Vetten, who is a research associate at Wits Institute for Social Economic Research. Lisa, good evening, and thank you so much for your time tonight. Let's just begin here. Certainly, when one looks at Section 2A, this does really appear to be something that is playing at the trust and the confidentiality between the victim and, someone that they're talking to, for instance, a social worker.
Yes, I think that is the major concern. The first section tries to extend responsibilities on a whole range of government and other officials in order to respond to domestic violence. But what it's created is a bit of a free-for-all. There's no clear clarity on who should be doing what and how they should be doing it. The second section is also really concerning because it does away with confidentiality. There it doesn't take into account the victim's wishes at all, whether she wants her matter to be reported, whether she wants to take it to the police. It ignores that completely and says anybody who knows that somebody is in an abusive relationship must go and report to the police or a social worker, or they could face a sentence of imprisonment of up to 5 years.
And Lisa, what implications could something like this have on, the victims themselves?
Quite a number of different effects. Firstly, it could potentially make them nervous of going to see a social worker. Every social worker or psychologist or helping professional that promises confidentiality would have to say to women, before they've even said anything to them, I cannot keep what you are telling me confidential. You cannot trust me because whatever you tell me, I may have to go and tell the police. So it may have the effect of cutting women off from help, which is a highly undesirable consequence. Our other concern is that it could potentially endanger women because they have no control over when a matter might be reported and how people might respond. They might have a social worker arriving on their doorstep or the police arriving on their doorstep. They don't know what's happening. Their partner hasn't been forewarned. His response may be to become violent towards her for thinking that she's the one who's gone and told somebody, and he may then become more violent towards her. So I think what this does is ostensibly it's saying to everybody, take responsibility, speak out when you are aware of abuse, but they don't have to carry the responsibilities for their actions. It will be the woman who will carry that responsibility. So we're concerned that it's going to cut her off from further help and potentially expose her to further danger. And also, I think, limit the kind of trust that needs to be developed. And I think the last thing is that it's a very incomplete remedy. It doesn't do things like say, what makes, or ask the question, what makes it difficult for women to be able to leave and to report? And often it's things like economic dependence, the fact that they don't have any alternative housing to go to, that they don't have good services or a shelter. And the bill is putting none of those provisos in place. So the special housing needs policy, for example, which was completed in 2015, has a specific section dealing with giving housing to women who've been in abusive relationships and need to leave. But here we are in 2020, still not implemented.
And then, one then looks at this, particularly in that situation where you describe how a woman could potentially find themselves in danger here. This mandatory reporting, it also really just takes away the woman's autonomy here.
That is exactly the point, is that if you look at the way that section is phrased, it's basically suggesting that she is like a child, or somebody who has an intellectual disability or psychiatric disorder. In other words, her mental capacity is impaired and other people need to take decisions on her behalf. The other thing it's saying, if it's not saying that her mental capacity is impaired, it's also implying that her decision-making cannot be trusted. It's suspect. We don't trust her to make good decisions about her life and that of her children. And that's deeply concerning because it starts to mimic an abusive relationship. If you're in an abusive relationship, you are very frequently told that your decision-making is bad, you can't trust yourself, you're stupid, you're useless, you don't know what to do. And now here we have a piece of legislation that is implying the same thing, that you can't be trusted to make good decisions about your life. Other people must take away and take over that right in your life.
And Lisa, I mean, when you look at this and what you're describing now, certainly this further abuses that woman, particularly that you've just described, that has been told repeatedly that they have no capacity to think for themselves, they're stupid, they really, don't measure up or are not even good enough.
Absolutely, and that is not an empowering message to be giving to women. And if we're saying that the law should be there to provide the maximum protection it can, it's not doing that with this remedy. What it should rather be focusing on, and it's not doing at all, is focusing on the criticisms that have been made for the last 15 years of how the courts and the police handle the cases of women who do want to report, who have come to their attention and said, please help me. We still hear numerous cases of women being turned away by the police. We still hear cases, and in fact there was a murder earlier this year of a woman who went to court, Renisia Kortke. When she got there, the court turned her away. So there is nothing that gives the police guidance around when they should be arresting and using their discretion, despite the fact that that's the single biggest complaint that women make most often about the police, is that they won't arrest. The Act doesn't address that. It doesn't fix that. It also doesn't fix the situation of where you have case withdrawals. Now, sometimes if a woman wants to withdraw a charge, you may wish to respect that. But there are certain situations where it's very clear that she's being placed under a lot of pressure and has perhaps even been threatened if she doesn't withdraw the charge. Now, that's a situation where there should be clear guidance to prosecutors around how they should judge those situations and why they should not withdraw and what they should be doing in order to ensure the woman's safety. And I think the last area where the law is not looking is those women who die with protection orders. There ought to be an automatic review any time a woman dies or a child and there's a protection order involved. We need to learn, why did the police and courts fail? Was there negligence? Or do we need to learn more about a particular category of abuser and what steps we need to take to better protect those women? So I think the law needs to spend less attention on making it everybody's responsibility to go and report women and spend more time focusing on how does it strengthen and improve the circumstance for those women who are choosing to report and do want the police and courts involved in their lives.
And, when you look at this law and the onus that is put on, as you say, people to report, when you look at really those who fail to report here and looking at what the law says, it does really look like those who fail to report are certainly facing a harsher punishment, certainly a harsher punishment than even the perpetrators themselves.
Well, absolutely. That's another irony of the law, is that in some ways domestic violence itself is not a crime, but here we've created a new crime of failing to report domestic violence. And as you pointed out, yes, we have the ironic situation where failing to report carries more serious consequences than beating your girlfriend up.